The Department of Commerce, International Trade, Investment, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs celebrates its third annual business month, which is November, under the theme Promoting an Entrepreneurial Culture, Innovation and Creativity. This year, in celebration, the department has joined with the Alumni Association of the UWI to put on this gathering here today. There are two distinguished gentlemen, along with yours truly, the moderator. My name is MacDonald Dixon. There is Mr. Titus Prevail, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of, well, it's no longer ministry, this is why I have the script here. It's called the Department of Commerce, International Trade, Investment, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs. He's the Permanent Secretary. And Dr. Danny
Thomas Samuel.
Dr. Thomas Samuel is the trade advisor in the same department. Gentlemen, the subject today is very broad. It deals with the impending Brexit, which is the United Kingdom getting out from the EU, the European Union, and how that will affect St. Lucia and the larger CARICOM area in the process. So without stealing the show, I will pass you on to Mr. Titus Prevail.
Mr. Dixon, thank you very much. And let me express thanks to the UWI Alumni Association for seeing the need to partner with the Ministry of Commerce, as it were, as we seek to engage our public in discussion that should help them better understand the environment within which our private sector operates and is likely to operate in the future. Therefore, the discussion on Brexit being part of our observance of Business Month is being seen in that context. And therefore, this evening's or today's activities, more or less one of engagement, discussion, as it were, and hopefully it will serve as an educational purpose or educational forum to really and truly commence in a deeper sense in St. Lucia discussions on international trade, and hope to take it into every single household, take it to the students, take it to the private sector, and get them also to begin to react in a more coherent manner to issues around them. And I think Brexit is a very good point to start. St. Lucia, as you know, is a member of the OECS. We're a member of CARICOM. And CARICOM is a member of CARIFORUM, which is CARICOM plus the Dominican Republic, in the context of a bilateral agreement we have with the European Union. And when we negotiated what is now the Economic Partnership Agreement between CARIFORUM and the EU, we had one of our critical member states in there for us, St. Lucia, and the English-speaking Caribbean in particular, was the United Kingdom. And therefore, any action by the United Kingdom, and in this case, its withdrawal or removal of itself from the European Union, would have implications for us or would be of concern to us, because there are many, many issues that we have not yet even thought through. Our access into the EU has been, for St. Lucia and a number of us in the English-speaking Caribbean, is really and truly access into the UK. And the UK therefore becomes the conduit for us to get into the EU. With the UK not being within that construct called the EU, what does that mean for us in terms of real and true access and benefits from a CARIFORUM EU EPA? My apologies. So we do have before us a number of issues. I'm going to later on get into more details, but just begins to set the stage for us to begin to think through what it means. It might sound far. The UK leaving the EU might sometimes seem very remote from us, but when you look at our trade patterns, our exposure to the UK under the CARIFORUM EU EPA, you will see that St. Lucia is perhaps one of two of the most significant countries in terms of trade with the EU that is actually done through the UK or with the UK. And therefore, it becomes a matter that is close to home. So I use this as my preliminary comments, you know, and I'm sure Dr. Samuel may wish to come in or yourself.
Well, I will talk, I'll listen to your colleague here, and I would like to pose a question to him so that he could start off with. Do you think that we will be better off, given the old traditional arrangement that we've had with Great Britain over the years, starting with sugar and then bananas and other forms of bilateral trade? There was migration and all of this. Do you think with Britain outside of the EU and on its own, we are going to be better off in a trade relationship with Britain?
Okay, thank you for your question, Mr. Moderator. Let me just say good evening to our viewers and our colleague students of the University of West Indies looking at this program. I also like to join my colleague in his opening remarks regarding the appropriateness of this initiative, which I think is very commendable and definitely well placed in the context of the Business Month, which has been held by the Department of Commerce. And to your question, it is at this juncture very difficult to determine ex ante or whether we will be better off. Yes, we have the backdrop of long-standing traditional historic relations with the UK, and because of where we are, where the UK has signaled its willingness to and that is actually driven by the exigencies, what is practicable at this point. Bearing in mind that the UK would have to negotiate a slew of bilateral agreements. The posture of the UK at this point is to largely roll over, or if you like, preserve its commitments that it has already undertaken in the EU with non-EU partners such as the ACP countries and including ourselves. So if that approach is taken, the best we can say is that we would have sort of a, not neutral, but largely the same sort of range of commitments. But if we were to negotiate new issues that are important to us, that had been not been apparent or as pressing when we did the EPA, we may have an opportunity now, say, to include issues of climate change, sustainable development thrust, and those other things that are important to our security and other concerns. That's if we had that opportunity. But the approach that's been indicated by CARICOM at this point is to largely go for a rollover to preserve largely the intent and the commitments that we already have under the EPA. Now, there's another aspect to what can influence whether we're better off or not, is that with the UK nested within the EU arrangement, we have a larger pool of what we call development support resources, such as what we commonly call the EDF, European Development Funds. That is contributed to by all the members in a prorated sense. With the UK, we'll just be dealing with what the UK can provide. Now, the UK would be facing a lot of challenges in the short to medium term, which may influence the sort of level of ambition, the level of its willingness, and the quantum of resources it might have available to assist us, notwithstanding its best intentions. So at this point, I would like to think that perhaps the current arrangement, we may have greater leverage because it's not only the UK that would support us in the EU framework, we'd have also other, like the French, also supporting us. So they would help the UK, help us. So I am not certain at this juncture how to call it. I would say that I think there are a number of concerns, risks, and headwinds that we are likely to face in negotiating this. There's a lot of uncertainty as to how we would land on this.
Thank you. Titus, with the possibility of Brexit becoming a reality, which would mean that Britain would now be out of the EU, do you think that the same level of respect and the same level of assistance that we got while negotiating the first EPA, when the periodic, as you're aware, the EPA is reviewed periodically. Mm-hmm. When these periodic reviews of the EPA come up in the future with Britain outside of the EU, do you think that we will be able to maintain the same negotiating postures that we obtained then?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and there's been discussion now within the CARICOM fora and discussion within the wider ACP with respect to this. And for those members of the ACP, and especially for us within CARICOM, who had long historical relations with the UK as a member of the EU, that question looms large. Because essentially, the UK was the country that batted for us, the English-speaking members of the ACP, and was able to identify in a tangible sense with our issues. Now, it would mean that we would have to rely perhaps a lot more on the French, and to a certain extent on the Spanish, but more on the French, who have a relation with the outre-mer, or the exterior members in the Caribbean, for instance, who could perhaps speak a language within the EU forum that could represent our interest in terms of negotiating for access to resources that are critical for our continued transformation from where we are to economies that could become much more efficient, much more competitive. So without prejudicing the members of the EU in terms of the maturity that they have the capacity to exercise in an arrangement with us in terms of a review of an EPA, we are aware that we will be missing a very big supporter. And we must not be naive. There are members of the EU who have had no type of connection, as it were, with us in the Caribbean. And therefore, their understanding of our reality is slightly different. And their capacity, therefore, to understand why resources are still needed or needed and should be allocated to those countries and to St. Lucia, it will perhaps take a little more convincing. And therefore, I think we may be in the near future, as we begin to negotiate begin to review the EPA, we might have to approach that in a more practical sense.
Dr. Samuel?
Yeah, if I could add to this, we are at a critical juncture where Europe is actually in the process of reviewing its foreign policy. Already we are seeing shifts away from what we might call some of our own core interests. We are seeing, for example, the tendency of Europe to want to treat Latin America and the Caribbean as a single block,
yes,
as opposed to two distinct regions. And in that larger construct, we are likely to be, some of our interests would be subsumed into things that are perhaps less important to us. So we need to guard against that, and having the UK sitting at the table would help to ensure the interest, especially of the English-speaking Caribbean, is advanced.
And
so
there is, and following up on Dr. Samuel's point, you would see now that as the EU, and the EU has already published and presented to the ACP some elements of the framework it wishes to adopt as we move into a post 2020 environment with respect to the Cotonou. And in that framework, the EU is really and truly looking at engagement within basically 3 pillars. And at the same time, looking at a more regionalized approach to the arrangements with us. So you have the A, you have the C, and you have the P. And how they approach us will be based on interests, on what they are able or likely to achieve within an arrangement such as a wider CARICOM Latin America framework, a CELAC, for instance. You might see them willing to engage through a CELAC type arrangement for certain issues, engage in a CARIFORUM arrangement for another set of issues, perhaps a wider ACP arrangement for different. So you now have variable arrangements that are emerging. And where?
Now that you have opened the door, I will go there. Well, of course, we are a small cog in the clockwork of international turmoil. We are now faced with a possible Brexit on one side of the Atlantic. And you have on the other side a philosophy of America first, where the whole NAFTA is likely to be dismantled, and that our great friend to our north is going to become perhaps a bastion within itself, trading with itself. It's possible, it's that large. How do we fit in this sort of modern day diametrics?
I'll take a first stab at the answer. I'm sure Dr. Simon is going to come back. If you look at ourselves in true proportion, the Caribbean is so small and insignificant in real terms, in terms of the global environment. I don't even want to speak of St. Lucia, per se, because 172,000 people simply you're not noticed, really, until perhaps you have chicken.
But we are a dynamic people, we are resourceful, you know. Yes. So
but the reality is that, and these things sometimes provide opportunity, because you're so small, you literally could fly below the radar. And you don't need so much to get a huge impact. For instance, from my knowledge so far, the US is looking at a relation with us through a revised CBI. Yes. There, I know the US Congress is looking at a special bill with respect to its approach towards small business development. This again has direct implications for, and it is a supportive bill for our private sector in terms of its growth. And what is interesting is that as small nations...
Hold your point. We'll break now for an advertisement.
Okay.
I have my mobile, landline, cable TV, and internet service. If I have a problem with any of the services, what should I do?
Here's what you should do to resolve the problem. First, get and fill out a complaint form and lodge your complaint with the service provider. If after 30 days there is still no solution, you may contact your National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission, NTRC.
This message is brought to you as a public service announcement by ECTEL, the NTRC, and this station.
Okay, I don't want to get in.
Yes, let us go back to this whole thing. Brexit on one side of the Atlantic and America first on the other. And here is this little pawn, St. Lucia, in the middle of all of this. So now, I think the point has been made, we are very resourceful people. We've faced adversaries in the past and we have conquered. How do we see this fitting into the whole scenario?
I think what we need, you see, the truth of the matter is that St. Lucia, and in fact, us in the OAS and CARICOM, are on the supply side. What we produce and we supply to the rest of the world will always be fairly small. I don't see us being the producers of any particular set of goods that is going to materially shift world trade. And therefore, all you need in these arrangements are small windows through which you are able to get market access and maintain your market presence. So niche markets become what are critical for us on the goods side. On the services side, what we need again is recognition of our skills, mutual recognition arrangements, so our people can move in terms of mode 4 on the services. And very importantly, we need to negotiate, we need to arrange for ourselves proper and efficient communication system through our telecommunications arrangements, so we can trade better in terms of mode 1 on the services. That is movement of cross-border movement. Again, we have done fairly well with respect to mode 2, our tourism, and we need to build that a lot more. And we are doing a lot of work right now in terms of reforming our domestic environment so that we can attract more foreign direct investment, and therefore commercial presence becomes a matter that we can entertain a lot more. But we don't necessarily need to have the whole world coming to our region for us to grow and prosper and remain sustainable. We need small, perhaps targeted investments, markets in either the UK, the US, that we could supply, and these are not necessarily big markets, niche markets. So once we have access in reasonable sizes to, in terms of demand, we may not find ourselves necessarily squeezed out of our path for growth and development. So I don't necessarily see the turmoil on both sides as necessarily going to negatively affect us once we can negotiate sufficient space for our small businesses.
Well, I think you've quite rightly pointed out the size constraint issue. There's also the hint, although you did not articulate it, frankly, quite clearly out, that we, in any event, we are not net suppliers. You know, there are trade deficits on both sides, and which is an advantage to us, because it would allow us to be able to mobilize our supply end, particularly in exotic areas which they may not be in a position to supply themselves. And there is one area that comes to mind, our trade in services. If we can mobilize our supply end at the services end, our population is small. It would not take a sizable percentage of the population of trained individuals to export that service. What do you think about a plan that would be geared to services? Because we have tried for generations the trade in goods end there, and we, first of all, we do not have the land. We do not have the critical mass that is necessary to become profitable in trade in goods. Well, but we do have the skills that can give us the advantage in services. What strategies and so would you like to see in place to surmount whatever negativism also that can arise out of a Brexit or an America first on the other side of the Atlantic?
Well, I mean, as you've indicated, we are well aware of our limitations as it relates to tangible trade, what we call merchandise trade or goods, for various reasons, in terms of cost of production, high cost of electricity, high level of imports of the inputs that we combine to produce goods, and so forth. And if we contrast that with services, which is intangible and which cost of setup, we are a lot more, we have greater levels of competitive advantage, and we can combine that with use of technology. And as you know, size is not a constraint in terms of knowledge. If you build a knowledge economy, you can insert yourself. I think really the world has given some direction to us. Many of our institutions have pointed to us how we should proceed in that kind of circumstance, and that is to try to insert ourselves into global trade through various strategies of market access and market entry. We need to insert ourselves on the good side in global value chains, but also in services as well, in terms of sharing risk. I'm engaging in international conglomerates by inserting ourselves. Of course, we have already negotiated a lot of agreements, and we need to get a lot of our people to be aware of those agreements and to take advantage, because these agreements clearly provide certain rights to our citizens if they seek to take advantage in terms of how they will be treated. National treatment, for example, non-discrimination and all of those things. So that gives them some certainty, some predictability as to what they will get when they seek to trade with partners. In St. Lucia and indeed other territories, we have also recognized that we can't do everything. So we have developed or looked at what are our priority sectors. So we have some priority sectors to be what we call our arrowhead in terms of the strategy, in terms of focusing on ICT, creative industries. We have, you know, a number of like health and spas and on specific areas, professional services, where we can take advantage of Mode 4, movement of temporary people and so forth, and, you know, using the arrangements of MRAs and other things between professional bodies to facilitate movement of our people. So the strategy really is about developing our quality of human resources, and that is critical to getting higher returns from such engagement. And then we can also go up in terms of Mode 3, in terms of more cases of commercial presence in St. Lucia, as we have it already in terms of things like call centers and doing business process outsourcing and some of back offices services that we provide to whether it's hotels or larger enterprises located in the metropolitan countries and elsewhere. So that is the sort of strategies using technology, using ICT, where we can insert ourselves into the global village. The great thing of technology is it removes the barriers, spatial barriers of time and distance.
And Mr. Dixon, this is the point I was making earlier when I referred to the telecommunication services, and I referred to the whole idea of mutual recognition agreements. Where we are is that we have already negotiated market access in services, in pretty much every services sector. Under the EU, under the CARIFORUM EU EPA, there might be constraints in individual member states in the EU at the state level or regional level, where you have certain requirements. For instance, you might have a requirement that says you need to be registered. And to be registered, you need to be a member of a particular association, and you need to be recognized. So mutual recognition agreements are critical, for instance. But what this drives us to focus on, in my mind, are two things. One, quality of human resource, which is what Dr. Simon was pointing to. And therefore, the focus must be on technical vocational training. There must be an emphasis on training and retraining, and that training and retraining must be certified so that people will have the requisite skills that are certified to allow them to either move physically from one jurisdiction to the other, or to be able to place themselves in the market in such a manner that they could attract other partners who may be willing to come in and go into joint venture arrangements in areas of information development, knowledge building. And that is really where we have our strength. In the case of St. Lucia, one of our clear strengths is our capacity to generate new ideas and knowledge. That's why we have 2 Nobel laureates. It's not an accident. That's why we find solutions in so many areas that require intellectual capacity and thinking. Position yourself as that. We talk about, in St. Lucia, we have a structure that we've put together in the form of a national export strategy. And in the strategy, we have a strategy for the services sector. And so we have a services policy, a strategy, an action plan. All of that is meant to take advantage of the arrangements we have already negotiated, whether it be a one-way free trade arrangement with respect to goods or a wider arrangement with respect to goods and services under the EPA. We will have to spend some more time with the United States looking at our arrangements with them because they are there. Most of the trade of the US in services comes through Mode 2, which is movement of persons into St. Lucia to enjoy tourism services. We need to now broaden the arrangements in terms. We need to also look at domestically, what are the products that we can produce and how do we insert those goods into our domestic value chain to reach the wider market created by the movement of tourists there, either by land-based or through the cruise industry. We need to find a way to insert ourselves in there. So I don't necessarily see us being in a situation where, because of what is happening in those two countries, if what our good friend to the north is policy, if it produces a healthier, wealthier America, we would expect to see these people moving out on more holidays, longer vacations, and therefore coming here. And this is where we insert ourselves in the process.
One thing that came to mind, I think we are well aware of our human resource capacity. But there is one thing that we must always bear in mind if we are going to be exporting services, is the innovation that is necessary to fuel these services, because service is not static. It keeps changing, and I don't care whether you're in ITC or in the creative field, it's never static. It continues to evolve. Are you satisfied that the necessary training to bring new players and to build the volume that is necessary to continue the trade on an ongoing basis? And when I say trade here, I'm talking about trade in services in general. Do we have that ground swell there to train new participants and to recycle and retrain old stagers in the game?
Very good question. I think we actually have, maybe by accident or otherwise, we actually have an understanding of that, you know. That is why in the Ministry of Education you have a technical vocational education training unit. Technical vocational education and training is critical to retraining, ongoing training, and skills development and certification. If this country is serious about building a stock of persons who are going to be providers of services, then the focus must be on technical vocational training. That is certifiable. And it is important, Mr. Dixon, for us to appreciate and accept that thinking. Now, tied to the whole idea of focusing on your services is also the need for you to enter into arrangements where people network closer together. We cannot and will not be able to succeed in this global environment if at the domestic level we do not appreciate the need for us to work together. I talk about working together in the sense of understanding the value there is in the success of other entities. We look at an unemployment rate in St. Lucia of whatever the number, 20%, whatever. And if you are a business person in this country, when you hear that, you should be very worried. Your business might be doing very well. But guess what? If you had those other 20% of this population that is not producing and therefore not earning income, if these people were earning income and therefore coming into your business and patronizing your business, imagine how better off you would be. So in other words, we must understand that the success of other businesses is important to our individual business's success. And that is why the networking is so critical. And people need to work together. Working apart and separate will not lead to success in this country, in an environment of change as rapid as you've identified.
Yeah, but we also have what is called a double whammy, because we sometimes send out our young people to train, and there are some of them never return because there has been, particularly in the larger countries to the north, on both sides of the Atlantic, where the brightest and best are retained. Now, I will ask you to hold your thoughts on this one while we go for another commercial break. Okay.
When the authority of the heads of government of the OECS and its other ministerial councils meet and adopt policies for the organization, they rely on the OECS Commission to transform these into action. The OECS Commission is the secretariat of the organization, a grouping of officials headed by a Director General, mandated to implement the decisions of the governments, but also empowered to make recommendations on the strategic directions of the organization. The OECS Commission organizes meetings, prepares budgets, conducts research, undertakes projects, negotiates for and represents the OECS member states. It is organized along several components. There are the commissioners from each member state who, along with the Director General, form the commission that oversees the work programs. There are also technical divisions with specialized units between them, as well as diplomatic missions in Brussels and Geneva. All these complement each other to make the OECS Commission the engine of regional integration in the Eastern Caribbean. The OECS has a proud past, and together we are working towards a brighter future for all our citizens. For more information, visit www.oecs.org.
Yes, I posed a question on the brain drain before the last commercial break. Who's going to tackle that?
Well, the thing about it is, again, given the smallness again of the labor market and the population and trends of the day, people tend not to be confined to the place of birth or the country of origin.
And the absorptive capacity.
And absorptive capacity. So people see themselves as international citizens or global citizens. And they, as I say, the world is your oyster. And so they go wherever opportunity lies. And now we have a diaspora all in the major metropolitan spaces in the US, Canada, and UK. And people are connected with family and so forth. And so if they think the opportunity lies there, but all is not lost with that. Actually, sometimes it's a long curve, but the benefits do come. We see remittances. Remittances, when we have a number of Caribbean territories, benefit significantly from remittances.
Including ourselves.
Including ourselves. I mean, Jamaica is a lead example of a country that, benefits a lot. We have even...
Well, that's population advantage.
Yes, even here we have the barrel trade. Now, what do you think is driving that barrel trade? Is people who are located in the States, who are able to send, in the States however, and send the barrel, which supports consumption, smooths out consumption, and allow people to be able to go to school or even deal with unemployment in their own country. Further, I want to give you the example of relocating to countries where perhaps opportunities to take advantage of the creative geniuses can sometimes be better realized than in a small state. Just recently we had a young man by the name of Joshua Esnard who was featured on a program on the US television where he had some, you could call it an innovation. Shark Tank, right. Innovation with some product to cut hair, some barbers. And now that's been, it's on Amazon. But he's St. Lucian.
He holds the patent.
Right, and so that is the way you see St. Lucians go out there. I know his dad very well. His name is Dr. Joseph Esnard. His wife, his mother is Dr. Anne Margaret Esnard, St. Lucians. And they have gone up there, done well, promoted that sort of entrepreneurial spirit in a young man. He has done this, and it does well for St. Lucia internationally. So the connection, is still there where people can get training and come back in a long loop to help stimulate, encourage other young people to see what's possible, and so on. But I want to just say something here that's very important in connecting, and that is through building centers of excellence and talking about, again, connectivity and networking. Very important avenue or strategy for developing, promoting innovation. And I really want to see St. Lucia look at what's happening in Grenada with the St. George's University there. Very transformative in training, building up the stock of human capital, which will serve their services strategy well and help with innovation. And as you know, it's innovation that drives long-run growth. So,
but Dr. Samuel, all this is well and good. But one of the greatest weaknesses that we have had over the years has been research. There have been a lot of ideas, beautiful ideas, but under-researched. And most of the centers of research are not located in our part of the region, except for perhaps Jamaica, with the University of the West Indies having built its own libraries over the years, and maybe Barbados and Trinidad among the MDCs. We have always looked, including myself, when I do research on certain things, go to the United Kingdom for research. Now that with Brexit coming on, although this has never been really used before, if I remember, to use research as one of the areas on which we can negotiate terms on. What are your views on introducing such a novel idea? Because it will assist us in developing trade, particularly trade that requires innovation.
You see, I think Dr. Samuel, when he spoke earlier on the process of the dismantling of the UK out of the EU and its implications for trade, he alluded to what the downside of the process is, that you would have little time to go into negotiating new areas because you are virtually in a rollover environment during the transition period. Because with Brexit, the UK, once it continues to be a member of the EU, and it will be a member of the EU until March 2019. It cannot technically engage in any new negotiations or negotiations with any other third party. And when it therefore would have ended its arrangements with the EU, it would technically then be in a position to commence negotiations with other countries. Now we know that the EU, the UK, will be engaged in discussions with other members. So essentially, in the period after the UK has left the EU, and it has not yet officially entered into any new negotiations, bilaterals, with other third countries, the rollover period will be governed, hopefully, by the rollover, the interregnum would be governed by the rollover of existing bilateral agreements.
And general principles.
Right. And therefore, while the argument raised by you is absolutely great in terms of us being able to introduce a new discipline, perhaps, on the research, it would have to come sometime later when you negotiate perhaps a new arrangement between, let us say, a CARIFORUM and a UK.
By way of strategy, what I think might be more practicable and expedient is to have a built-in agenda where these other areas can be incorporated, because it's really going to be a race, and the UK is going to be stretched thin, because what all countries are trying to minimize is uncertainty and disruption to their trading arrangements, because that is costly. We would not want, as you say in the interregnum, to have to deal with MFN rates, which will apply if we do not have approval by the WTO of any sort of arrangement.
Differential rates.
You know, so these things. So we really need to find a strategy that reduces, as we said, disruption, uncertainty and disruption in our trade arrangement, which is really what the race is about. So we are moving to engage the UK, but think of it, we are just, the English speaking is 7 million. If you add Haiti, we are at 15, and if you add the DR, we get to some approaching critical mass and viability. So it's really about that. And beyond this, the EU will be focused on so many other things that it might be very difficult to bring in all of these other
new areas.
Because climate change, security, all of the things.
Now, under the EPA, we had negotiated a labor and migration arrangement. I can't say that it's a contract. And, but it was in specific areas of trade. I don't recall all the areas now. But how do you view such an arrangement continuing into a bilateral with Great Britain? Given the fact that one of the reasons for Brexit has been migration.
Well, yes.
and with the other EU members. So we have a problem there.
Well, as you quite rightly indicated, migration has been at the center of the concerns or the angst, especially the British public.
But it can be contractual and
yes.
medium term. They don't have to be long term.
In fact, that is what was envisaged under the carry from EU EPA.
Yeah.
It was not necessarily movement of people for extended stay. It was always temporary movement of persons.
Particularly in creative industries.
Right.
Yes.
I remember.
But with contracts to provide services.
Yes. The migration issue, as you indicated, has been at the center, the whole movement of labor, which comes with a single market. You see, we want to have a deeper form of integration, but if we want to have that deeper form of integration, it involves movement of factors of production, which invariably includes labor. Now, also, in the case of the UK, where its production in agriculture and everything is highly integrated with the EU companies and so forth. So that involves, people moving and relocating across the sea. And so it's one of the evils, you want to call it an evil, or one of the things that is almost invariable. But for us in our small state, it's, for our people, we need to give them the opportunity for Mode 4. Which is where we want to put the greater emphasis, more than relocating in a more permanent sense, to work. People will move for contractual periods, like 6 months, maybe a year, 2 years, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, Mr. Dixon, the arrangements with the EU and the UK under the single space, the European Union, it automatically meant free movement of people. Under the EPA, or in a post-Brexit era, even under the EPA, there was no free movement of people. It was always contractual. So what we envisage in a post-Brexit environment between the UK and CARIFORUM would be a similar type arrangement. So we should not see, or there should be no fear from the UK of the situation that occurred in terms of movement of people while they were a member of the EU in terms of free movement, and that should not be a concern of theirs, because as we speak, the movement of our people under the CARIFORUM EU EPA is simply through contractual arrangements. So I don't expect that to change in terms of any greater fear from the UK in terms of movement of our people into the country.
Now, on another note, but still related to Brexit and Great Britain, we have a very large diaspora in Great Britain. And so there's most of the other English-speaking the English-speaking Caribbean, for the former English colonies. Apart from Jamaica, none of us have really tried to exploit the creating products from our home base for export specifically to the diaspora. One thing in mind that comes to mind is baby foods. I know, for instance, Gerber baby foods come into St. Lucia. That's one brand, and there are many other brands that come out of Europe, out of the EU. And one of the products that come back in, believe it or not, is banana puree. I would like to believe it is made from all bananas. Why the founding fathers of industry and so never thought of bringing the factories to the fields to meet these products other than coconuts? They did it in the case of coconut, in fairness to the founding fathers. They did, in fact, create a factory in Soufriere to make soaps, oils, and so on, byproducts from the coconut and copra. But we never really did it for the other products. We never canned mangoes. We never made orange juice or grapefruit juice or anything, which could have had, outside of just our small populations, a ready market in the diaspora, because these people normally look for things with the names of the countries from which their countries of origin, you know, good or bad.
Well, it's interesting.
I'm throwing all these ideas.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that, and it's not just a situation with respect to the Europeans or Britain with respect to us in the English-speaking Caribbean. It is a phenomenon you see in terms of the wider ACP relation with the EU. I mean, you have countries in Europe that are known for chocolates and chocolate making, and
with the
beans,
coming from being reaped right there,
and the beans are coming from other ACP countries.
Yeah.
And very importantly, they tell you these beans are beans from an ACP country known for fine
Now we
cocoa.
should begin wrapping up, gentlemen.
Yes, but the point here is we need to look at the whole issue of global value chains as ACP members and begin to relook our arrangements and relations with the EU.
That's a beautiful idea.
And therefore, the
so
whole
raw
issue,
materials come from Africa, converted here and re-exported to Britain.
And therefore, we need to begin to look at the thinking is
rules of origin.
Rules of origin
need
to be looked in a different way.
Covered,
precisely. So that we're not just looking at rules of origin within one.
So you would have regionalized the ACP rather than institutionalize it.
And make it practical.
Yes.
Yes. So this is the sort of thinking we need to have in a post-Cotonou environment.
Yeah. What are your views on bringing the factories to the field? You know, I mean, earlier on, we made a statement that, okay, we did not have the critical mass. But then there's also the niche market. So,
there's always benefits in terms of transformation and value added, taking from the primary product to a more refined or transformed product. But each of the commodities, the primary commodities that we have traded, have their own story, in the sense that if the investment that perhaps would have been needed to underpin that effort did not take place for reasons that are not all apparent to us now. Especially, for example, mangoes is a seasonal product. It probably would need to, it has a short shelf life. It would need certain storage arrangements, in terms of it's susceptible to...
but leave mangoes alone.
Okay.
What about soursop? Soursop is now considered one of the
the
possible
thing about
cures for cancer.
Right. This is new information we have had, perhaps that become vogue in the last few years.
That's fairly recent.
Fairly recent.
Yeah.
And the thing also has to do with the organization of production. If you notice, we have not had organized production with proper farms that, with these commodities. Most times you have a few soursop in somebody's backyard or free on the hill and so on, not organized lines of production in these commodities. So,
okay, gentlemen, let us begin to wind down. We've only got 2 more minutes.
Okay. Well, I'll go first, Mr. Dixon, and say that the discussion this evening, today, looking at the impact of Brexit, the possible impact of Brexit on our private sector, our economy, is one, I think, that we're just beginning to scratch the surface of. Yeah. On the face of it, we know already what, we have discussed what should happen in terms of arrangements to secure predictability of our trade. But I dare say there is a lot more that we've not discussed, and a lot more that will become apparent.
We only took the ice out of the fridge. Yes. We haven't knocked it out of the tin yet.
So we will have to keep our eyes on this ball, and we'll have to engage in more frequent discussions with our private sector in particular as Brexit comes near.
No, you need the producers to be involved, and whether you're producers of trade, or whether you are a contributor to trading goods or to trading services, you need to be upfront. And I think that given our size, negotiations should not only be left to us, I'm using us because I was part of the system at one time, to the government negotiators. The negotiations should feed quite heavily on the private sectors and the producers, the captains of industry, and the producers of the various things. So, Samuel?
Yes, as much as possible, the private sector has to be, centrally involved in the process of negotiating. But as we indicated earlier, this is likely to be a very quick one. We have a serious time constraint, and so we have to hit the ground running with this one. So we have to draw upon existing expertise and the arrangements that we have using, in our case, we have a regional negotiating machinery in terms of the Office of Trade Negotiation, and that will be augmented with inputs from the member states, and we have our whole arrangements within CARICOM in terms of Article 80, which guides such arrangements with external trade policy, and the conference, of course, will provide the overarching framework for our negotiation with third countries in terms of the principles and mechanisms and so forth. But of course, as you said, the private sector will be germane and very central to that effort.
Well, gentlemen, all that is left for me at this stage is to thank you very much for a very heartwarming and very active and involving discussion. The only one parting shot that I would like to make is that if Brexit comes on at all, I think so that the OECS can get capacity is for them to negotiate as a team, while the individual units will contribute, but the OECS as a team will be much stronger than if they went as separate entities into the negotiating area.
We share that.
I throw that out free by way of advice.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you again, gentlemen.